I am so excited to have on the podcast today Jennie Jones, who is the founder of Treehouse Agile Learning Community, a self-directed learning center for homeschoolers using agile learning tools to foster intentional community, natural learning, and independence in students ages 5 to 12 in St. George, Utah. Jennie launched the Treehouse Agile Learning Community in the fall of 2024. She has about a dozen students now with plans to continue to expand. And Jennie, just so excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. I'm just so fascinated by your background. You're a former ballerina turned homeschooling mom of four, turned education entrepreneur. I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey. I guess initially from being a dancer to being a homeschool mom, and then we can get into your founder story as well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I did ballet all my life growing up and actually got a degree in it. And yeah.
Yeah.
And some of my passion for interest-led learning actually comes from as an adult finding out that my mom actually hoped I would grow out of my interest in ballet.
Why?
She didn't really think, it was going to be a useful skill.
Oh, yeah.
And when I found that out, I was so impressed, that as a child, she didn't really discourage me from it. But as an adult, I can look back and realize, so many of my amazing friendships came through that. And just all the different skills I learned, sticking to something and the discipline. And anyway, that kind of opened me up to realizing it's important to let kids follow their interests, because we don't know what they're learning when we look at it and think that's not a useful skill. You can never make a career out of that, right? So anyway, so yeah, I stuck with ballet long enough to get my degree, and I danced with professional companies for a couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I ended up when I got married and decided I was ready to have a family. Homeschool wasn't really necessarily on my radar, except that when my oldest was ready to start kindergarten, they only had full day programs where we were living. And I didn't think that would go well for him. And so I had a couple friends encourage me to try homeschooling. So that's kind of where that came in. And of course, I feel like it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Hmm.
So that kind of opened the door to thinking about education differently for me. And so, fast forward after a few years of homeschooling, we then got introduced to unschooling. And that's where I kind of started connecting those dots of realizing that our interests really can teach us so many more things than just the interest itself or just the hobby itself. So started that with my own kids, and all that time I had learned about micro schools, and so in the back of my mind I thought that would be really cool, to start something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I can just interrupt you there then for a moment
Yeah.
because microschooling, obviously it's been around for a while. Self-directed learning centers for homeschoolers have been around for a while. I wrote about agile learning centers, which your program is modeled after in my unschooled book. So these have been around for a while, but when did you, I guess, what was the time frame when you started to hear about microschools? Because most people have only heard about them within the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I actually learned about it. We were in Arizona when we started homeschooling, and Prenda was just
Yes.
getting going.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this was like 2018 timeframe
Mm-hmm.
then. Okay,
Yep, exactly. And
great.
I heard about Prenda, and we were actually about to move back to Utah. And so I was like, no, I want to do this Prenda thing. And they weren't in Utah.
Okay.
And so it just was in the back of my mind. And then when I was in Utah, I kept researching about Prenda and discovered Acton Academy. And so I filled out an interest form about Acton Academy and found out that Ian Lindsay was about to open one in St. George. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's coming. We weren't in a place at that point to be able to pay for private school, which is kind of how he was modeling his. And so I, at that point, I was just thinking, where can I put my kids, right? And so I didn't enroll them at that point in Acton Academy, And
You
then
did
I
not. Is that
learned,
what you
I
said?
did not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did not. I kept homeschooling.
And maybe
Um,
can I just ask
yeah,
there, Jenny, a little bit about what was your experience like? Because I think this is a common experience not only for homeschooling parents more generally, but especially for homeschooling parents who become education entrepreneurs,
yeah.
that that sort of the independent homeschooling feels like it might be lacking in some way, that you are sort of looking for a larger community. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what your experience was like that was kind of urging you to find a place for your kids while still sort of retaining all of those incredible gifts around homeschooling.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like microschooling kind of brings the best of both worlds together. And so I was looking for community. I was fortunate. St. George has a great homeschooling community. So we had park days. There were starting to be a lot of classes, so I could sign them up for like a la carte type things. Um, but in general, I think I was still in love with the model of a small group of kids coming. I wanted them to be able to collaborate with each other. I also wanted my kids to be exposed to other kids' interests, right? Because if you're interest led, but your family tends to hover around certain interests, then they're not ever exposed to new ideas, right? So that was definitely, I wanted them to be pushed in that way a little bit. And then I think I wanted a little bit of structure to help me as a parent, right? To keep our own systems running. That's definitely one of the benefits I've loved of having my own thing is I'm committed to my systems because I've got other kids coming. It's a lot easier to kind of relax when it's just your own kids. So
Right. Right. And so Ian Lindsay, who's been on the podcast before, had opened his Acton Academy in St. George as a private school. You were sort of looking for more of a homeschool collaborative learning center hybrid model. So what happened next?
yeah, so I think all that time, researching Prenda and then researching Acton, I was just sort of like building in my mind what would my thing look like,
Yeah.
right? And I started looking at Sudbury Valley schools and thought that that was more the direction I wanted to go because ironically, where, starting with Prenda, I loved their model. And then I got to Acton and I loved their model. And then after I had unschooled for a while, I went and toured Acton and I thought, this still feels a little bit rigid for what I want, which surprised me because I was, a straight A student growing up. Like I was a rule follower, so I was kind of like, wow, I really want open. And so that's when I went to Sudbury Valley was kind of what I was looking at. Now my concern with Sudbury Valley, because I was running it in my home, was how do you maintain your culture if the kids have all this freedom? I worried that the culture would become whatever the kids want it to be, right? And so I started listening to a lot of podcasts about Sudbury Valley, whatever I could find. And I ended up hearing about Agile Learning Center. And in that interview, what she said, she had changed her uh, Sudbury Valley model to an Agile Learning Center. And she said what changed for her was the culture. And so that was kind of a like a key word for me, right? Was okay, they one of their values is this intentional culture building. And so that's when I went in and just started researching agile learning. So that's kind of where I chose my model.
I love that. Listeners and viewers will know that my kids attend Sudbury Valley School, the original school in Framingham, Massachusetts. And of course, I'm a huge advocate for self-directed education more generally in all of its forms, including the Agile learning model. What attracted you to self-directed education? You said, you were a
Um,
straight A student, kind of had gone through a conventional system. What was it that appealed to you about unschooling or self-directed education more generally?
Yeah. So my first kiddo, he was a lot more like me as far as like I could give him a checklist, right? And as long as there was a reward attached to that checklist, he would do it. And when my second came along, I thought, I've already got the secret sauce. I'll teach him to read the exact same way I taught the first. And he was having nothing to do with it. And I also had my fourth baby at the time. And so I think I was in this postpartum, like, I'm going to just loosen things up for a minute. And
Yeah.
I just started like devouring content about unschooling because I was so curious. Can kids learn to read if they're not forced to do it? Right. And and so he was kind of my experiment. I said, I'm not going to push him to read. I'm going to let him, engage with the world in the ways he engages with the world, and I'm just going to continue to offer it. And so that was kind of my first experiment with it. And sure enough, it took till he was almost 9. So it was a little scary for me to let it keep going. And one day, actually, at our church, he volunteered to read something. And I was like, in front of people? I knew he was starting to get it together, but I didn't think he would be fluent. And he read, and it was so fluent. It came out so smoothly. And so I was kind of like, oh my gosh, unschooling works. They can learn to read.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing. And of course, that is such a common story for unschoolers as well, that if you allow the sort of natural cycle of reading to take place, it'll happen kind of in different time frames for different students, but often the sort of quote unquote later readers will very quickly become fluent. You hear all the time someone will go from, hardly reading at all to then reading Harry Potter books, within a matter of a week.
Yep.
And loving to read and having that confidence, like you said with your son, of being able to get up in front of a group and read. And
Yes.
that must have been so rewarding for you.
Yeah, it really was. And in that same time, like I shared about finding out that my mom, had almost wanted to, stop me in my own interest. I worked through a lot of my own. I kind of, was watching my kids and their interests because they loved computer games. Sorry, I'm gonna have to. Lily, go find daddy, okay? Yeah, you have to go find daddy. I'm so sorry. She just woke up across the hall, so I'm gonna send her to my husband really quick.
No worries.
Okay, come here. I'm gonna get.
Balancing motherhood and homeschooling and entrepreneurship. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that experience was like for you, especially as you were starting to say about interest-driven homeschooling.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, as I said, my initial sort of experiment with it was letting my own son decide to, or sort of take the lead in learning to read. And so at that same time, when I first opened up to this idea of letting them follow their interests, I think my biggest fear was that my kids were interested in video games and my kids were interested in computer games. And so, it's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to let them go outside and stare at the bugs and climb trees and, all the beautiful things that you see on these homeschooling blogs, but to say, I'm going to let them take these deep dives into computers that they're fascinated by, right? That was a little scary for me. And so I think that's where finding out that my mom, hadn't super agreed with my interest in dance, but I could see where dance had been such a benefit in my life, kind of opened me up to, I'm going to see what the benefits are of this interest that they have and quit trying to control it so tightly, right? So one of the first things I did was I sat down and played Minecraft with them, and they were so excited, of course, to have me play, and so I sat there and I said, well, what do I do? And they said, build something, and I was like, but I was going to build a house, so they said, just build the floor first, and I'm like, well, which one's the floor block? And they were like, any of them, mom, just pick one. And I'm like, but which one's the right floor block? It was this like eye-opening experience for me that they've been in this infinite world, where their creativity rules and they're just trying all their ideas. And I was like, what's the right answer here? And so that was kind of eye-opening for me, that when we're given space to explore interests, when we're given space to be creative, it kind of breaks down these rules and you get to question them, like, is there a right answer here? There's not always a right answer, and it's okay to try your idea and then try a different idea, right? And so that kind of won me over to it as well.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so you'd moved from Arizona to Utah. You were sort of collecting all of this information about different educational models related to self-directed education, all of the different iterations of that. And then you really fell in love with the Agile model. So I guess what was the time frame like for this? Did you have a sense that I'm going to open an Agile Learning Center, and then it happened over a period of time, or tell us a little bit about those steps?
Yeah. So by the time when I was first researching, it was for where can I put my own kids, right? By the time I found Agile Learning, I knew I was ready to start something. Part of that was because Utah passed two things like kind of on the heels of each other. So the first was the educational savings account, our Utah Fits All scholarship. That came out because my question when I looked at Prenda was always now in Arizona, Prenda had like a charter partnership, right? So their model was a little different there. But when they came to Utah, you were going to charge people for it and then just pay to use the Prenda program. And so I was always like, who will pay for this? Because in my circles, homeschoolers were like DIY people, right? They weren't paying private school tuition. So that was one of my questions was who pays for this and how do you find the people that are willing to pay, right? And then my second question was if I want to run it out of my home, what are the rules? And every time I looked it up, it was very vague, right? But then I heard about some legislation that was being considered, which was going to define microschools, how many kids you can have in them, where they can be. And so me being the rule follower was like, oh, it's going to be clear cut and I'm going to know that I'm not breaking a law or something, right? And so yeah, those two passed kind of really close together. And so that's when I was like, I can do this. I know what the rules are. I know how the funding can come. And so that part kind of snowballed actually really fast for me. And that's when I dug in and said, I've got to figure out what model I'm using if I'm going to do this.
Oh, I love this. I'm so happy that those two pieces of legislation really worked in tandem to encourage you to really take the leap into becoming an education entrepreneur. You talked about the Utah Fits All scholarship. Of course, Utah joining the ranks of now about a dozen states that have universal school choice policies enabling education funding to follow students to whichever educational setting works best for them. And in Utah, that's sort of a wide variety of educational models, including microschools and self-directed learning centers for homeschools and traditional private schools and curriculum, tutoring, so forth. And I believe that it's about $8,000 per student per year in Utah that families are eligible to access. And of course, there's a long waiting list now of families who want to access those funds
Yes.
because it's so popular. So there was that piece, and then you're right. Then the spring of 2024. The Utah State Legislature passed basically a zoning bill that helped to clear some hurdles for microschools to be able to operate in all zones, commercial zones, residential zones, agricultural zones, as well as sort of eliminating some of the barriers if you wanted a home-based microschool. And just so great to hear that that had this immediate impact for you and your entrepreneurial journey. So, what happened next after these two pieces of legislation passed?
Yeah. I so, so I told my husband that I would do this and that I thought it would be really fun to do as a family. And he, interestingly, at about that time, his work was experiencing kind of this like feast and famine. And we'd lived through it we were kind of going on our second year. And I said, I really think this would be fun to do together. And he was feeling like he needed to start, looking elsewhere for work. And so we basically sat down and said, if we're going to do this and keep him, home to do it with me, this is how much we need to make. This is what makes it feasible, right? And so we kind of just started working the numbers, figured out how many kids we would need, what kind of tuition, if we felt like that tuition was fair, we just sort of designed that. And of course, so his skills are in a lot of the things that we teach. So he went to culinary school, and then he's in construction, so he does a ton of woodworking, and the kids love both those things. We do a lot of baking, we do a lot of working out in the wood shop, right? And so that for him was a little bit like, I'm not a teacher though. And I said, well, in this model, we're interest led. And so your job is to get excited about what the kids are interested in, which he's very good at. So anyway, that was like another step in our journey, was just sort of deciding like, how does this work as a family business? Let's see, I might be losing track of your question.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that that's part of it. So now you're realizing, okay, we're going to start a family business. What was the time frame in this? Was this like last spring, last
Yeah,
summer, and then you
yeah.
opened in the fall? I guess what was your, um, tell us a little about that pre-launch period from kind of setting up
Okay.
the business and recruiting families and kind of figuring out all of the ins and outs of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So, okay, so I had learned about this Senate Bill 13, but then it sort of disappeared. I kind of read about it being voted on, and then it was like I couldn't find the information on it again. So when Utah Fits All passed, I looked it up again, and it was like, oh my gosh, that bill passed, you know? And so that was spring of 2024. And so I thought, okay, let's try to open by fall. It was a bit of an ambitious goal.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did was I reached out to Yes Legal, or Yes Every Kid.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeslegal.org. Yeah.
yes. And they were an amazing resource. And they kind of actually introduced me to the questions I needed to be asking, right? So a couple things that came up in that were, do you need a childcare license? So I ended up working through that. I ended up working with John England. He was also very helpful at LiberatED, because my city actually wasn't on board yet with this new Senate bill. So this arena was all new for me. Sort of the red tape, like you have to go talk to your city council, that part. So all of that came out as I tried to get my business license. And uh, the other piece of the puzzle was we wanted to run it in our home, and we had been in the middle of sort of this long-term renovation.
Mhm.
And so we said, okay, we need to finish the projects that make the home safe and useful, right, for the school. So we sort of like buckled down on a major to-do list and worked on that summer. Well, the interesting thing about that is when you go tell people I'm going to run this school out of my home, but your home isn't ready for them to see.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, right? So I just started putting feelers out. I put it out in our homeschool Facebook group, and then I started putting some things out in. We have like a Moms Helping Moms group locally, and so interestingly, there I saw a post from a woman that was looking for summer camps, and I just randomly put on there, I'm planning on opening a micro school this fall, and I would be open to running some summer camps to test my model. So that was sort of my brave, like, I'm putting it out there, right? Well, this mom wrote back right away and said, that's actually what I'm looking for, is a micro school. But her more immediate need was just some sort of summer camp, right? And this was not a homeschool mom. She wasn't in my homeschool mom groups, right? And so I tapped into this new area, and she of course had friends that were looking for something similar. And so the next step was to make a library meetup. I said, well, then let's just meet at a library, and I'll just sort of, we'll get to know each other. We'll let the kids play, and we'll kind of, I'll explain my model to all of you. So I did a library meetup. I did like a Zoom call. And then I just pushed out an open house as far as I could. I sent, in my Zoom call, I had some pictures of how it would run. They knew the general area of where it would be, because it's my home in my neighborhood. But I didn't do my open house until August, like the beginning of August. And that was a little scary because I was trying to open, by Labor Day.
Wow.
So I was really grateful that families hung on, and
Yeah.
waited for that.
So then you opened, did you reach your target goal of opening around Labor Day?
Yeah, we opened it the day after Labor Day.
And
At
how many students?
at that point, I had four students and three of my own three. So we had seven total when we
Yeah.
first started. And then I just kept sharing, what we were doing. I got my Instagram account going. And since then, I've added uh, five more.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Now, if those original founding families, those or the four students in addition to your three, had they been homeschooling? You said that some of them weren't part of that homeschooling group. They were just looking for a microschool. I guess what were the backgrounds of some of those initial families? And
Yeah.
then the five new ones, are they coming from conventional schools? Are they coming from homeschooling? What were they looking for?
Yeah, so I had one who they had pulled her from school because it was just not a healthy setting for her. And but they were trying to do homeschool, but she was the youngest, right? And so her older siblings were gone and she was just sort of home alone, and so they didn't really feel like keeping her home and away, isolated was really helping either. So they were looking for more community for sure. And then she brought along a friend who was in a similar situation. I think in their situation, the mom was more looking for the interest-led idea. She felt like she would thrive in a community. She was finding school boring, basically. And
Yeah.
so, she felt like she would really thrive in an environment where she got to try her ideas because she's a very motivated and curious girl, right? Um, and then another one, the mom felt like the public school environment just again was not a healthy environment. One struggle that they had was the sort of like class-based discipline where like as a class we all lose the privilege if there are just a couple that are struggling, right? So we either all win or we all lose. That I know that was like a real struggle for them
Yeah.
last year. Yeah. So yeah, so I would say in general, as a general answer, they none of them were really wanting to homeschool, but they were all looking for something different than public school.
Yeah. And was
Yeah.
that a surprise for you? Were you expecting more people to come from the homeschooling world into microschooling, or did you have a suspicion it would be more of the conventionally schooled folks?
That's a great question. I think originally I pictured that there would be homeschoolers like me who were wanting more community. Although one thing I've discovered since then is I actually didn't tell a lot of my homeschool friends what I was doing. I think because I assumed that they liked what they were doing, right? Like they were in homeschool, they all had this solid system going. And since then, I have found a couple friends who actually would have loved my model. I actually thought that my model was probably a little too radical for some of them. And so anyway, just as like my general advice to anyone thinking about doing this is like you can't judge. You have no idea who's going to want what you're offering, and so it's just better to talk about what you're offering to
I love
anyone.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're running the program out of your home. And tell us a little bit about what the week looks like. How many days are students coming? What is, I know with, self-directed education, there is no typical day, but sort of give us sort of the general structure, especially using those agile learning tools.
Yeah, definitely. So they're coming 3 days a week to me. They come Tuesday through Thursday. I have an hour window for drop off because I like everyone to arrive as they feel comfortable and settle into the space how they need. And I've loved that I get to kind of have some one-on-one time with each of them, check in. Agile Learning uses project management boards called Kanban boards. So that's a time where we can look at their board and kind of see what are the things they're hoping to get done that day, what's going well for them, what they need more of. Um, so that's our check-in. And then another tool is our community board. So the community board has offerings that are either offered by the adults as the facilitators or by the kids. So it's sort of like a message board, right? And so we'll post flyers to join this club or join this opportunity. And Agile Learning calls those offerings. It's also a place where they can request things. So when they have an interest, like we had a 5-year-old that really wanted to dissect owl pellets. And so there's a little list there, right, where they can request that offering and we can help facilitate their interest that way. Um, and then, yeah, then they have free play. So my space has, I have an area set up with like kind of Montessori learning tools. I have the Love Every Reading Kit, which I actually really love. And then we've got, tons of board games, a big kitchen table with art supplies. I have a little craft corner. We've got a greenhouse and a wood shop. And then we've got like an audio visual little space. We call it the podcast studio, which is where I'm at right now. And then we have like a little maker space with a 3D printer and a sewing machine. And so we just sort of set up like little areas, little spaces in our home where they can go and explore their interests. So they'll choose either to join an offering or they'll do their own free exploration. And then a new thing that we just started this semester is sort of like a merit badge program. We call it Power Up Pins. We just found that to support the kids, especially as they're in this 5 to 12 age group, we wanted to help them get the feeling of like setting a goal and then completing tasks together. So we've just been creating these little pins based on their interests that they can earn, and they kind of work like merit badges, and those have been really fun.
Oh, I love it. It sounds like such a magical space.
Mhm.
So, I know you're running it out of your home. What do you think the future holds then in terms of growth for your program? After kids, are 13 and up, are you expecting to kind of age up with the kids? I guess, what does the future hold in your mind?
Yeah, tomorrow I'm holding my first Zoom meeting for our teen program.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah, I'm very excited about that. I just learned about a program called LiberatED, and they can offer accredited high school diplomas. So I'm exploring a partnership with them to sort of tap into. I'm finding that my market are people who want something different but maybe aren't ready to homeschool. And so I'm thinking that knowing that the option of having an accredited diploma might help that feel safer for them to come over. And so that's sort of the opportunity I'm trying to open up right now. Because yeah, definitely my 12-year-olds, including my own 12-year-old, they're ready for some like longer term projects, right? Like opening a food truck or, like doing something bigger where we can like stick with it a little bit longer. So yeah, I'm excited to get a teen group going.
And then what about demand? It sounds like other, you mentioned some of your homeschool friends interested in what you're offering. Are you sensing that you might grow the numbers more generally, including the teen group? Like, what is your kind of ideal size?
Yeah. So the model I have right now, I would love to have like 25 to 30, but you can't in a house. So I'm what we're facing right now is figuring out how do we sustainably grow towards a bigger space.
Yeah.
And so we're going to open the teen cohort, and if we have to, we will offset the schedules so that we can stay in that 16 rule, but still stay in our house.
Yeah. So alternating days, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one option we're considering. Our dream of dreams, there is an Agile Learning Center in California. They've been open for about 5 years, and their space is a converted elementary school. And so each room is dedicated to an interest, and they've got amazing outdoor space, so as soon as I showed that one to my husband, like that's his dream, is we want that to exist for our community. So that's dream of dreams. So now the question is, how do we slowly scale up? Another path that I'm considering is I've had some parents interested in doing something similar. So if I can get several pods going, in a few different houses, then I think we could build student base till we could all go in on a building together. So that's another path we're pursuing, I think.
Oh, I love it. And are you feeling like there is that sort of building demand for these sorts of alternative models, being buttressed by the education savings account, the school choice programs as well? I mean, I guess what is your sense of your community there and interest and accessibility toward these programs?
Yeah, definitely. Another uh, testament to what I said about just tell everyone. When I held my first open house, I also hadn't super told my own neighbors, like just my neighbors whose kids are my kids' ages, right? I think I kind of told them, but again, I was like, my idea is probably too radical for them because they're not homeschoolers, you know? So in my mind, it was like you had to step to homeschooling first and then you step to unschooling, right? Well, they came to be supportive to my to for my open house, and I was surprised that they were so curious about the model. And then, of course, they hadn't heard of Utah Fits All Scholarship yet. So I told them about that. And so now, at least in my immediate circles, there's this growing like, wait, how do I get that scholarship? And you mean I didn't know that I could actually homeschool, but send my kids to someone else to homeschool them for me, you know? So just this opening up of like, education can look a lot of different ways, and you can mix and match uh, how you make it happen, how you find a fit for your kid. I definitely feel like that is opening up in my community.
Oh, it's so exciting. Yeah, I feel like we're really just at the early stages of this. And I think a lot of these innovative learning models are just going to take off in the coming years. It's really exciting to be here at the ground floor for this. Um, I would love to know a little bit about your reflection now, from this pathway of sort of professional ballerina to homeschool mom of four to now education entrepreneur running an in-demand microschool. What has it been like for you in becoming an entrepreneur? How has that experience been?
Yeah. When I look back at my dance career, one of the things that I value that I learned from it is sort of this entrepreneurial, you have to make work for yourself. um, Working in the arts isn't, there's not a lot of like full-time jobs with benefits, even dance companies, if they can offer you a salary or benefits, usually you take like an off season, right, with no pay. And so they sort of create work for themselves, whether that's running classes or choreographing. And then actually, when we moved back to St. George, I directed an adult dance company here for a little while. And so that's where I kind of learned like you have to be relevant and you have to network and you have to talk to people and you have to figure out what the community will come watch, right? Because you can create art all day, but if no one will pay to see it, you got to have some other kind of job, right? And so I definitely feel like that sort of was the beginning of my entrepreneurial skill set, I would say. And then with that, I have a love for the arts and I have a love for people being creative and what you learn from trying your ideas, right? So I feel like a lot of that fed into where I am now. And in a sense, when I teach the kids, I sort of feel like I'm teaching them to be creators, right? Because your community is what you make of it, and your life is what you make of it. We're always creating, right? We can either be creating or we can be consuming. And so I want to be the one creating it. And so that's sort of what I feel like I'm teaching them with interest led learning is like you create your opportunities, you create the things you wish existed in the world.
I love that. And what about for your own kids? What has the transition been like for them, of sort of independent homeschooling to now being a part of a microschool community?
Yeah. So I do this, I have a little journaling hobby with my kids once a week. And one of the questions a week or so ago was what's something you admire about our family? And my 9-year-old said right away that we have a school. And that made me so happy. Yeah. So I think it feels special to him that we have created something, and that that our school is ours and we're getting to build it. So that's been really cool. Um, my oldest, he's actually, because he's one of the oldest in the school and he loves computers, and so he's sort of stepped up into like almost being my computer lab facilitator. And so for him, I love that he's gotten sort of these leadership opportunities, right? um, so it's been, I feel like it's been positive. The only trade-off for me really was I let go of like a few of my slow mornings, which
Mhm.
I've loved about homeschool, but that's totally worth the trade-off for me. And we really built our schedule to protect family time, right? And to protect the lifestyle that we wanted our family to have. So we're really grateful that it's working out.
So great. So, what advice would you give, Jenny, to others listening, especially homeschool moms who might be listening or homeschool parents who are really inspired by what you've built and say that they want to do something similar? What would you suggest they consider as they get going?
Yeah, definitely the Yes Every Kid Foundation is a tool. I feel like if you start there, then you kind of know what you're biting off, right? Because for me, the that legal side just felt so daunting. But when you have someone spell it out for you, like these are the things you need to these are the questions you need to ask, right? That checklist was really helpful for me. The other thing I would say is talk to people. Just when you're trying to get an idea out there, you have to kind of, it's not that you're trying to sell it, it's just that you are sharing it, right? It's this idea, because the more you talk about it, the more real it becomes, right? And then you start finding your people, whether that's people who want to come to you, or people who want to be part of building it, or people who know people that would want to come, right? It's just, you just have to like put the idea out there. And then the last thing I would probably say is take advantage of your social media. Like, it's free marketing. I am on there probably pretty regularly. Um, I answer everyone's questions. Like, any question they have about school, it's like this generosity of information. And it isn't always come to my micro school, because for me, people knowing that they exist is going to benefit everyone, right? It's going to benefit me just having them know that they exist. So I just share like information about, did you know that there's a thing called micro schools, and these, I'm just sort of like trying to plant the seeds of people knowing that they have other options.
And you're sharing that on your social media pages as well
Oh,
as these other groups, like
in
you mentioned,
groups.
the moms
Mm-hmm.
helping moms and homeschooling groups. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
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 So not only, not so much feeling like you have to advertise, but just being a part of the community, commenting on people's posts and so forth can really draw more attention to your work and bring more people to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So, Jenny, if my listeners and viewers want to follow your journey and learn more about the Treehouse Agile Learning Community, what is the best way for them to do that?
So I have an Instagram account, and I'm actually going to question what it is. So I'm assuming you can share a link.
I'll put a link in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
um, and then I have another Instagram account. Before I started the micro school, I did homeschool coaching for a little bit. So that was another place where I just started meeting people. And that actually inspired me to know that people are needing community, right? They're needing options, because I was seeing over and over that these moms were uh, that was something that was lacking for them. So that's another Instagram called our_house of learning. So you can also find things I share there just about self-directed learning. And then I'm happy to have people email me or anything like that.
Yeah, and if folks want to learn more about Agile learning communities and the Agile model, do you have recommendations for them to explore?
Yeah, Agile Learning is such an awesome community. They really embody this generous spirit. So they have a free starter kit on their website. And then they also have like a Slack community that you can join. so that you can talk to other facilitators and kind of find out how they're handling different things in their center. So I definitely check out their website.
Great. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Jennie Jones, thank you so much for being on the LiberatED podcast and best wishes with the future of your microschool.
Thank you so much for having me, Kerry.